All right, welcome to Chapter 18, Section 3. We will be covering this section between today and tomorrow, finishing it on Friday. We're going to talk about several events that could have very quickly turned the Cold War into a hot war in this section. And so today we're going to cover two of the three. So, foreign policy in the early 1960s. This will be under JFK for the most part, and a little bit of President Johnson tomorrow at the end. So, Kennedy was forced to deal with a series of situations that threatened to turn the Cold War into a hot war. The Bay of Pigs was the first one, where JFK inherits an Eisenhower plan to overthrow the communist dictator of Cuba, Fidel Castro. So, the Bay of Pigs was a plan created by the CIA. Eisenhower liked it. However, he wasn't in office long enough to be able to enact it. So, JFK very quickly kind of approved it. And so the plan called for a CIA trained force of anti Castro Cubans to invade Cuba and to join with the Cuban people to overthrow Castro's government. And so Kennedy will kind of reluctantly accept this plan, and it will be scheduled to take place on April 17th, 1961. However, the entire action will be a disaster from start to finish. And so, after hearing of the losses, Kennedy refused his advisor's request to provide U.S. air cover for the invasion force and decided to cut our losses and just get out. Um, and so, the United States will lose a lot of prestige with this disastrous attack, and we also looked incompetent, or basically like we didn't know what we were doing. We had done things that we condemned in other nations, and many Latin American countries were angry with the United States for violating many of the non aggression pacts that we had signed with them. It also made many Latin Americans view the US as the ugly American. Now, remember, we're talking about how we're trying to promote democracy, things like this, support countries and their elected leaders. However, the biggest problem is, well, we just blatantly tried to help overthrow another government, and it's going to make us look really bad because of it. And so here's a map of the Bay of Pigs. Um, so they're going to launch. First, they're going to be here in training in Guatemala. Then they're going to move to Nicaragua, where they're going to take both planes and boats across and try to go into the Bay of Pigs here, which really wasn't a good place to attack, mainly because of the shape of the bay and the surrounding area was a lot of swamps. There's not really a whole lot of places to get out. Unfortunately, that's where the whole thing is going to be a complete disaster. And so, because of the Bay of Pigs, the United States looks really, really bad. So, the Berlin crisis is the second issue we're going to talk about today. This is where the President Kennedy was determined to respond to growing communist threats by the new Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, who was threatening to seize control of West Berlin. And yes, Joseph Stalin is no longer in power. Now we have Nikita Khrushchev. So, Khrushchev has to kind of flex a little bit for the Communist Party, and he's going to threaten to invade West Berlin. Upon returning from a failed summit conference with the Soviets, Kennedy increased U.S. military strength and preparedness in the event of communist aggression. So, in other words, we are going to start spending $3 billion on national defense. We're going to double up on the draft, and we're also going to activate the National Guard. We're also going to create $200 million worth of fallout shelters in the United States. So all this was done to basically start preparing us for the eventual communist aggression that could happen. And so it's going to be kind of a tough time for Kennedy. So the Soviets will respond to U.S. actions of militarization by closing off access to West Berlin and building a wall to again stop the flow of East Germans to freedom in West Berlin in August of 1961. So basically, overnight, a wall is going to basically emerge around West Berlin and kind of cut it off from the rest of the um, world in a matter of now there's only a couple ways in and out. I'll have a picture coming up here in a little bit to better show that. And so the Berlin Wall will be created, and the main purpose of this is to stop East Germans from escaping to freedom in West Berlin because now they got to go through actual checkpoints. They can't just walk across the border anywhere they want. But in spite of threats from the USSR about invading West Berlin, Kennedy refused to stand down and vowed to continue to support West Berlin in every effort he had. And also, Kennedy kind of figured out in the back of his mind that if the Soviets were really going to invade West Berlin, they wouldn't have built a wall. They would have just invaded it. So by building this wall around West Berlin, it kind of eased off Kennedy's mind a little bit that, well, now he no longer really has to worry about USSR invading West Berlin because they built this wall to keep people out. And so now they're not going to worry about attacking anymore. So here's a picture of constructing a more permanent Berlin Wall. Originally, it was just a bunch of barbed wire and fencing around it. Eventually, they will create that concrete wall, though. And so the Berlin Wall was a total of 96 miles, which is basically the equivalent of starting in Seawing and driving the coast of Huron County all the way down to Forestville, for those of you that know where those two places are. So this is where we're going to stop today. But the Berlin Wall will be a huge sticking point, a huge symbolic thing going forward in the Cold War. And it won't be until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1991 that really symbolizes a collapse of, actually, it fell in 90. Anyways, it will symbolize a collapse of communism upon the fall of the Berlin Wall in the early 90s, and an end to the Cold War when it is taken down. So that is it for notes today. Super short. A little bit longer tomorrow. A couple more complex things to talk about. That's kind of why I wanted to have more time to do that. And also, there is no lesson check today. So this is it for your homework. Please make sure your notes are up to date. And if you have any questions, please contact me.